So in the past 20 years, I've gone on to get my master's degree in psychology. I've become an ordained minister, and I'm also in the field of neuroscience. And
Mhm.
so I look at that integration between the feminine psyche, brain, and spirit, and how the effects of trauma perpetrated against women inhibit our capacity to stand forward and really lead the changes that we need to
Mhm.
stand and step up for. And so I'm very curious about the timeline. So, a couple of the questions that I have. So, what we're here for is to have a conversation where I am just intrigued by, because from the perspective of epigenetics, we
Mhm.
carry 14 generations of gene encoding where our genes turn off and on. And I also look at how we are carrying the scars of the patriarchy of our grandmothers, great grandmothers, not that long ago, up until the witch trials,
Mhm.
that impact women today in being able to like actually have a voice, stand out, move beyond thinking that their power comes from their ability to manage other people's perception of them, et cetera, et cetera. So what I am really intrigued by is if we kind of walk back to when the fall when the shift when the power of woman
Mhm.
was revered to when it began to be feared. My understanding that was around 6,000, 8,000 years ago. So yeah, I'm just in no particular order. I'm curious, there's some of the questions that I have for you is just your perspective on not only the timeline, but what all happened in that 5,000-ish year period up until the Inquisition. What was it like for women? What's your perspective on why feminine power, almost from a spiritual perspective, why did it have to go underground? And what's the resurgence now? But I have questions in this area, but let's start with the timeline.
Well, the timeline is actually much more complex than saying it was 6,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, because it depends where you're talking about.
Mm,
If you're talking about Europe, it also depends where in Europe we're talking
mm,
about. If you're talking about the Middle East, you know, in general, in the Middle East and in Europe, there were cultures that appeared to have been much more female-centered, goddess-centered, um, that up until, well, actually, that existed, from Paleolithic times up until various time frames when there were invasions from the steppe cultures who were much more male-oriented, patriarchal, and that started as early as about 300, 3,500 BCE, and was pretty complete by the time the Minoan culture um,
mm,
was destroyed around 1500 BCE.
mhm,
Um, in the Near East, you had similar early village cultures that underlie like the things we think of as the great civilizations of Egypt or um, Mesopotamia
mhm,
in somewhat of a similar framework.
mhm, mhm,
In other parts of the world, it's very different. In many places, indigenous cultures continue to honor the female and the feminine
mhm, mhm.
to this
So
very day. But yeah,
So like when I think of the documentary, a
mm,
lot of it was featured and targeted around Europe and sort of
yeah,
like the westernized culture. So,
yeah, because
so
that sort of that's what gave us the dominant culture we have today.
mhm. So what I'm hearing is that there were cultures that were intact that honored, regarded, respected, revered the feminine on the planet that were not touched by the European influence that has that has really sculpted what we're facing today as a patriarchal culture, as a modern society.
Yeah, there were cultures in which women held power
Hmm.
and in which they weren't, not all of them would have talked about goddesses. Like you've got cultures like uh, the Six Nations in the Northeast that
Hmm.
were where women held very formal power. You know, there was a system of checks and balances between the clan mothers and the chiefs, and ultimately the clan mothers were the final say, um,
Hmm.
and where the principles of like life and honoring the earth and stuff are very core,
Hmm.
but they wouldn't have conceived of them as a goddess
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
or even as a god. Yeah,
Yeah, but more like where the feminine
yeah,
was, where there was an equality, a gender
yeah,
equality. And from my understanding, there was a period where for 35,000 to 50,000 years before this fall, where we did live in more of a matriarchal culture, not hierarchical,
yeah.
but where she was revered, whether she was the tree that gave apples or she who gave life. Is that accurate?
Well, again, it depends where, and
Hmm.
we have to recognize that there were hundreds, maybe thousands of different Paleolithic cultures. So they
Mm.
weren't all the same.
Hmm. Hmm.
And we don't know that much about them except from what we can tell from various art and artifacts. But certainly in Europe, there are goddess figures that appear very early.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
yeah.
So really it's repairing the psyche, if you will,
Mhm.
of the Western feminine.
Yeah, at least we can talk about that, like what happens to happen in the Eastern or wherever,
Mhm.
you know, that may be
Mhm.
that may be another topic and it may be
Yeah,
for
yes.
another group of women to deal with, right?
Yes. But really, but I appreciate that that's really helpful to see that there were multiple experiences happening simultaneously.
Yeah.
But for those that we are directly connected to, that our descent that we descend from,
Hmm.
these lineages of European women for a lot of us, especially in America, and where we've been shaped by so from what I understand, the feminine Holocaust, like during the Inquisition for that 300, 400-ish year period, 9 million women were burned at the stake in Europe. Is that right?
The 9 million figure, Mary Daly used that,
Mhm.
but it's really pretty heavily contested now.
Mm. Mhm.
You know, the point is not the absolute number. I think the point is what it did to the culture.
Mm.
And in some ways, I mean, we see the same thing happening now. Like,
Mhm. Mhm.
you know, it was a conspiracy theory that took over the culture and that resulted in masses of women and some men being tortured and killed.
Mhm.
It always tended to die away when it spread to the upper classes. So it was primarily peasant women and men
Mhm.
uh, that were the victims of it.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm. And
but
tell me,
yeah,
how do you see that? I mean, I see it, but
it's
I'm
a
curious.
direct ancestor of something like QAnon.
Mhm. Mhm.
Same accusations,
Mhm. Mhm.
you know,
Mhm.
the same idea, the same, uh, yeah, the same accusations of, you know,
And
poisoning.
I'm less familiar with QAnon, but what I understood the accusations then were really anything having to do with women and healing or birthing or midwifery or things like that. Is that?
Well, it was the witch persecutions, you know, developed this whole basically conspiracy theory that said there were masses of women having sex with the devil, using their powers to ensnare men, to curse your cattle, to, you know, anything that went wrong, you could blame on the local witches, and
Mm.
that they were trying to that they destroyed children, right?
Mhm.
Um, and cursed people and hexed people, but mostly it was that they worshiped the devil.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
they were inherently evil and had to be destroyed.
And the devil at that time was
The Christian devil, like,
the Christian devil.
yeah,
So,
it was a
so
Christian,
yeah.
it started with the Catholics, but the Protestants got in on it too once Protestantism developed. And
Mhm.
it was a great convenient way to take any of the stresses in society, and there
Mhm.
were plenty of them then. There was a whole history of peasant rebellions,
Mhm. Mhm.
starting primarily after the Black Plague in the 1300s,
Mhm.
that depopulated Europe. And because of that, labor was very scarce, and so labor finally, if you survived the plague, you could get more, right?
Mhm.
More
Mhm.
money, more wages, you had some bargaining power.
Mhm.
Well, the upper classes and the nobles didn't like that, so they instituted laws that limited how much you could pay people, for
Mhm.
example, in England, and instituted a poll tax, like a tax everyone had to pay. Poll meaning head, like for
Mhm.
every person had to pay the same, whether you were rich or poor, which obviously fell much more heavily on the poor than the rich.
Mhm.
And there were major peasant rebellions over and over again. So the lower classes are getting uppity, and how much better to have them directing their anger and rage against, you know, women worshiping the devil than against the nobles that were actually oppressing them.
Mhm. And women weren't actually worshiping the devil. These were accusations
What
that
were
were
the
put
accusations?
upon
Yeah.
them.
Mm-hmm.
And up until then, had there already been an ongoing systematic breakdown of the feminine that culminated in that, I mean, to me, like that grotesque
Mm-hmm.
sort of the Inquisition and what that all represented. But had it been for hundreds or thousands of years a systematic breakdown in Europe of the fall of the feminine, or was
Well,
it?
when you say the fall of the feminine, that's kind of abstract, but there's
Mhm.
certainly been a continual erosion of women's power,
Yes, thank you. Yeah, yeah.
both civil power and also of images of female spiritual power,
Mhm.
sacred power.
Mhm.
Um, in Judaism, there were goddesses of Canaan and early Hebrew goddesses that were eventually shoved out of the pantheon, or it's not really a pantheon, it's just God, right?
Mhm.
Who's supposed to
Mhm.
not have a sex,
Mhm.
but uh,
Mhm.
they're, when the Bible got codified, it kind of left out any goddess images in
Mhm.
anything except, oh, these were the sinful backsliding of heretics.
Mhm.
Um, in Christianity, the Virgin Mary came in as a beneficent
Mhm.
image of female power who took over, I think, many of the roles of the earlier mother goddess.
Mhm.
But it
Yes.
didn't translate into women having actual power in the church or actual roles as spiritual leaders, except in um, nunneries.
Mhm. So this, I really, your words are very succinct in particularly the erosion of women's power. And what do you think was what precipitated that?
It was a long process, but I think a lot of it had to do with war.
Mhm.
Even going back to like Mesopotamia or ancient Egypt, um, war and slavery.
Mhm.
That when warfare became endemic And when it became wars of conquest, not just tribal wars,
Mhm. Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
you know, war to actually conquer territory
Yes.
and take captives and enslave them,
Yes.
then you had to motivate men to fight.
Mhm. Mhm.
And if you think about it, it's not that easy actually to motivate men to stand there in a line while chariots thunder down, and
Mhm.
not kind of look at it and go like, I'm getting the hell out of here, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So how
Yeah.
you do that is sort of the stick part is make really differentiating men and women and making it the most shameful thing for a man to be like a woman, to be fearful
Mhm.
and cowardly,
Mhm.
um, as women were supposed to be. You had to
Mhm.
allocate, uh, you had to redefine strength as aggression
Mhm.
and the
Mhm.
ability to wield aggression, and then allocate that to men.
Mhm.
And all the values of caring and nurturing and rearing and stuff got left to women and got devalued and seen as not strength. And I mean, we see that still operating today. Like, just listen to Trump for 5 minutes,
Mhm.
or Netanyahu or any
Mhm.
of the strong men.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And and then the carrot was that if you stood there in that chariot line and you won, you got to rape the women and loot the city and take stuff.
Mhm.
And that went on in Mesopotamia, like the history of Mesopotamia from about 3500 BCE on is like, someplace develops this beautiful city-state culture and all this art and architecture and great advances in science and prosperity and incredible irrigation systems, which was part of why they needed all those slaves, was to dig and maintain those irrigation canals, right? And then they go to war with another city state and it all gets destroyed. And then that city state builds up this beautiful civilization. And then they go to war with somebody else and it all gets destroyed over and over and over again.
Mhm.
And that was the context for at least
Mhm.
a couple thousand years before Judaism developed and the Bible was written. So you have to read the Bible as coming out of a context like that,
Mhm.
uh, where strength is already defined as conquest.
Mhm.
And you
Mhm.
still find remnants of an older vision of female power, both in the Bible and in Christianity and in fairy tales and myths and art and everything. Um,
Mhm. No, that's very, very riveted by what you're saying, both in the piecing it together, and I'd never really seen it in such a succinct way that in order to enable the men, like the men's humanity was quashed out of them, and it was deemed the humanity in them that wouldn't want to stand there in
yeah,
war. And then so I mean, that is such a compelling way to sort of speak to that, of that their humanity got quashed out of them. Don't be like a woman, stand up. And then the prize
yeah,
was that they got to rape.
yeah,
And so it's really the dehumanizing of men by this act of war that also simultaneously was dehumanizing women.
yeah. And women, can't be empowered. In early Mesopotamia, you've got the goddess Inanna, who's the goddess of love and war. And there's songs where she's singing praise of her own vulva and her breasts, and but
Mm.
you can't really have women have that kind of agency around their own bodies if they're going to be war prizes.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. And so the threads of this are what we are unbinding ourselves from today.
Trying to.
Trying to. I mean, I'm like
Some
holding
of
that
us.
we are.
Yeah.
That we are, because I really see that the I think of the words of the Dalai Lama at the Vancouver Peace Summit in 2007, where he made some statement about how the Western woman will save the world
Hmm.
because the Western woman, like we are uniquely, we have unique access to education and civil liberties and resources. And I mean, I've lived internationally for years, and I've seen that as a woman, I couldn't go out, after dark because I was a female, or
Hmm.
and how many of our sisters don't have the capacity to simply say what they think and have the money to buy the thing that they want to do to educate themselves and all of that. So I do, and I see that the shadow that Western women walk with is one, this fight against their body. I mean, look at the multi-trillion dollar, I don't know if it's trillion, multi-billion dollar beauty myth industry for women fixating on what their body looks like and also running their bodies into the ground, through overdoing for others and all this, the health complications from that. Women's relationship with money, feeling completely disempowered in how to manage money, how to make money, what to do with money. And then in relationship, like settling for really, really, they might be hugely accomplished in one area of their life, but they might have miserable relationships or no relationships.
Hmm.
And when I look at these three common areas that Western women in particular, I mean, I've known all of them myself. It's like I was on food stamps, totally dumpster diving, had no idea how I was going to like put money. I didn't come from a family with money, and I had no idea how I was going to like pay for rent at one point in my life. I had eating disorders, like I said, there were multiple rapes. So, I mean, I really walk with a direct experience of what I feel it's almost like that's the area where we lose ourselves as women and where we lose our power into these three great sort of myths of Western women. But all of those I connect back to the subjugation of women, the objectification of women, and the devaluing of women. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of intrigued on the like, okay, what do we need to do now to repair to heal the pasts of our ancestors that we carry so we're not perpetrating them forward.
Hmm.
What do you see in that in terms of the here and now, our relationship now with what we're coming out of as
Well, I
women?
think we need to look again at what we consider strength
Mhm, mhm,
culturally and say, well, to me, feminism isn't just about people with female bodies having more power, though that is part of it, but it's also about looking at these sets of values and challenging them and saying, well, there are other kinds of strength. There's a tremendous strength it takes to bring a child into the world. There's the probably even greater strength it takes to take care of a child and nurture a child and feed it and keep it fed and educate it and
mhm,
do all of those things. There's all of the strength it takes to tend the earth and grow food and take care of people.
mhm,
All of those qualities, like maybe we should start seeing those as strength
mhm, mhm,
and acknowledge that that uh, I always think of Isaac Asimov, the science fiction writer, had he had a character who was a politician named Harry Seldon, and he always said, "Violence is the last resort of the incompetent."
mm, mm. So true. Yeah.
Yeah, if we looked at the world like that, then maybe we look at something like the Middle East conflict in Gaza, and instead of saying, well, Israel's got to show it's strong by completely destroying all the people in Gaza who actually, most of whom have nothing to do with Hamas, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm,
starving children and doing horrific things, in response to attacks that were genuinely horrific. We might say, well, there's a different kind of strength, and that might be looking at what are the underlying conditions that are causing the kind of despair and rage that led to those Hamas attacks, and
mhm,
how do we address them?
mhm. Yes.
Just like we do in permaculture, if you've
Yes.
got a pest in the garden, instead of saying, where's the bit, what poison can we wipe it out with?
Mhm.
You say, well, this is telling us there's some imbalance here, something is wrong, right?
Mhm.
You
Yes.
know, maybe we need something to attract more birds that are going to eat this pest or other beneficial insects. Maybe we have something lacking in the soil that are making our plants susceptible.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know, we have to look at the underlying conditions and change the ones that are favoring the stuff we don't want
Mhm.
rather than just trying to nuke and destroy it because that's going to create resistance.
And what you just said is such a beautiful segue, both from the relationship between our own inner ecosystem and the ecosystem of the planet, because I have a sort of theory that a lot of the what we see for sort of a lot of the spiritual idealism and a lot of the personal development sort of movements, and I mean I've done the whole gamut from, early Werner Erhard, est stuff to, before it came landmark, to enlightenment intensives, and have sat with gurus in India and, lived in Vipassana communes and ashrams. It's like but I have this kind of theory that a lot of the spiritual traditions that are present today, they harken back to a very masculine approach, which sort of values mind control. Like, if change your thoughts, like,
Mm,
will your lower nature away in service to some transcendence.
mm,
And then in modern psychology, which was also harkens back to men that were the founding fathers of it, a lot of modern psychology relies on another form of mind control, like behavioral modification, or suppression of emotions, or shifting thought processes in our brain. Yet, what neuroscience shows us is that 80% of our lived experience emanates up from our subcortical brain, which we have zero conscious control over, hence why it's subconscious. And so I sort of look at how the conversation is changing, like where I see where a lot of us have been co-opted into thinking from masculine oriented spiritual ideals and psychological ideals, that there's something wrong with us that we need to release or let go of, or like that part of us that's self-sabotaging, or that part of us that fantasizes about having affairs or has affairs, or that part of us that, binge drinks or binge eats, like that it's something that we have to get rid of,
mhm,
which promotes that internal divide. Whereas when the brain and the psyche is actually given a sense of curiosity and welcoming, like,
mhm,
oh, I wonder what's happening, inside, that's causing you to want to, cut yourself, or in more extreme things, or, maybe it's just sit on your couch and watch TV all day instead of doing something that is meaningful. And so to me, part of the repair, very similar to what you're saying, is that there's a whole different conversation about how we humans even heal or transform, that includes our bodies and our brains, versus these a lot of, I sort of seen the past 100 years, 150 years, with a lot of especially the personal development movement, where so much of it is neurobiologically inaccurate, and it perpetuates that divided self. So just like with what you were saying, like I think of with, oh, there's a weed, put a, pesticide on it. Like that's like we're going to get rid of that. But where we all walk around in these inner conflicts all day long, but our system can feel that, and it will create it. We will continue to be at war with the parts of ourselves that really need support. They need the beneficial insects to come in,
right.
they need. So do you, I know I just sort of said a lot there just about my sort of theory about that. Does that touch anything in you, where how you look at things, or anything in that
Yeah, I think a lot, I think humans have some very core needs.
mhm,
Um, I usually think about five of them that we need to be safe or feel safe. We need to feel like we belong to something bigger than ourselves.
mhm,
We need to feel we're seen and valued. We need to feel like we have some kind of impact on the world. Um,
mhm,
and we need some sort of sense of meaning and purpose, some way it all is supposed to make sense. And I think, right now we see all these extreme right groups and cults and stuff that are very good at meeting those needs in negative
Mhm.
ways.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we need to build movements. Our movements on the left are not terribly good at meeting those needs.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's why I actually left social activism and got into psychology because I saw how much not entropy, but how much breakdown was within my fellow activist communities because relationally people were in so much pain and there's also this epidemic of trauma in our culture that is not attended to, but just look at the suicide rates and the prison system and I mean all the things and it
Yeah.
speaks to that we're not well, yet we have phenomenal capacity to be well, just like a barren dirt plot that can be turned into a thriving ecosystem.
Yeah.
We have what we need.
And I think our overarching culture no longer provides us that sense of meaning and purpose.
Mm,
For some people get it from religion, but
mm,
most people are not terribly religious. Um,
mhm,
you know, we don't, the sort of myths of America and all of that kind of have lost their coherence and their attractiveness. And that leaves people, when people have no sense of meaning,
mhm,
it
mm,
leaves them wide open to, and when they don't feel valued,
mhm,
it's very easy to convince them, like, you belong because this other group does not belong, right?
mm, mhm, mhm,
You have value because you're white or you're male, or
mhm,
and
mhm,
someone's trying to take that value away from you.
mhm. And what do you sense will help restore culture in a way that offers that more readily so we don't need to be enacting what we're the results of being so sorely disconnected from meaning and belonging and safety and all of that. What do you sense will repair that?
I think we need to find ways to organize and connect with people that do meet those needs. And that's the writing I'm working on now, actually.
Mhm,
And I think we can't offer people a great sense of meaning and purpose. We can say, like, this is a moment in time where we're here to really heal and regenerate the earth.
mhm, mhm,
And you have a part to play in it, whoever you are. You have unique qualities and gifts that are needed at this moment,
mhm, mhm,
and come join the community of Mother Earth's healing team, right?
mhm. It's beautiful. I'm in.
Yeah.
Hmm. Do you have a sense around and this no one will ever know, but do you have a theory around why feminine spirituality like was there a spiritual reason behind why the feminine um has gone through what we've gone through or has gone through what it's gone through from a spiritual perspective?
In terms of, like, was there some reason it was all meant to happen?
Yeah, like do you have any thoughts on that? Not that we'll ever know, but do you
Yeah.
have any thoughts?
No, I
Okay,
don't,
okay.
I don't think it was all meant to happen. Like,
Mhm,
um, I think it's always tempting to find meaning in it that way, but I think it's actually, we stay more in integrity if we just say, well, it happened,
mhm,
and now we have an opportunity to make something else happen.
mhm. Yeah, like just in that evolutionary process where yeah. Hmm. And let me just check the time. Okay, I've got my Starhawk questions here.
Yeah.
Hmm. If you were So if you were to give me advice, knowing that I'm, in a way, I've been in this line of work for a few decades. However, I feel that as we mature and come into ourselves as women, I feel that I'm only just now, entering from maiden into woman in certain ways. And I see that my work is certainly laid out ahead of me for the next, who knows, rest of my life, because it is the commitment that I am, like, it is the movement that I belong to, is the restoration of women as co-equals with men. And my vantage point is the inner work of what needs to happen to create an integrated system within, so our bodies are in alignment with our psychology, in under the umbrella of really honoring the calling of each of our souls.
Mhm.
And do you have any guidance or advice for me that you sense, what you would like to see as part of that conversation, as to the inner work and inner opportunities that we have as women to really rise to this occasion so we can reclaim strength?
I think as women, it's helpful to look at some of the conditioning that we got,
Mhm,
um, and just to make choices about it.
mhm,
Like,
mhm. Yeah, I
you know,
think that.
to know that they are choices. I mean, I was raised in the 50s,
Mhm,
as a girl, right?
mhm,
Some part of me will always deeply believe that it is not my job to stick my hands into an engine and get them all dirty and try to fix something.
mhm.
I could, but I know that I could,
Mm,
you know,
mm, mhm,
that there are perfectly good women mechanics around, and if I wanted to choose to, I could be one. And if I don't, then it's a choice. It's not
mm,
something inherent in my biology.
mm, mm. I hear that. That's really
Yeah.
rich, and especially the whole kind of concept. I think I forget who said it, but how culture is to humans what water is to fish.
Uh-huh.
It's being aware that we're even the water that we're swimming in, the culture that we breathe, has sculpted and molded and conditioned us as women to believe certain things about ourselves and our abilities. And so what I hear you saying is the being aware of that, and then also recognizing that there is choice within that.
Hmm.
And then when there's choice, then we have an ability to speak up, speak out, do something different, make a new choice, which sort of breaks the spell,
Yeah.
which we are here, as witches, and I certainly bow down for you for your role and reign in that, but to really break the spell that has been cast upon us.
Yeah.
Hmm. Like truly. Hmm. Well, I don't have any other questions in this moment that have either come to me through our talking or what I had mapped down. Is there anything else here that you feel you'd like to share?
No, it's probably a good time for me to go off and, but
Thank you.
keep me posted on how it all goes.
Okay, thank you. Truly, thank you from my heart, Starhawk. I really appreciate it.
Okay.
Okay.